Viking Cruise Line bans children, Carnival crashes in New York, and Space Mountain, Florida changed forever. All that coming up on this week's edition of Sunday Sofatime. Welcome back, travel fans. I'm Morgan from the very unofficial travel guides, and 20 seconds ago I told you what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks for coming over here. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe and like me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. This week I picked out 3 travel-related stories that piqued my interest that I thought I would tell you guys about so we could talk about it. The first one I want to tell you is that Viking Cruise Lines has now banned all children on all of their cruises. Some people think this is sort of controversial, I guess. I think it's an interesting move. Viking Cruise Lines, as you may or may not know, is more famous for their river cruises here in Europe, and they also offer ocean cruises. Now, when they started offering ocean cruises, when they built their ocean liners starting in 2015, those were already child-free, so you could only book for passengers ages 18 and up. But their river cruises, they allowed children starting at the age of 12 until just recently. So now they've announced that for all sailings beginning August 1st of 2018, the age of all cruisers must be over 18. I wonder what that means if you already had one booked with a kid. I don't know. Not my problem. There's one thing I want to mention about this. I think taking a kid on a river cruise is probably a bad idea anyways, just because the whole environment, the whole energy, the whole vibe of a river cruise is not something that I think kids would enjoy. There's not the typical things for kids to have fun. There are not water slides. There's usually no big, shows. There's not costume character appearances. I don't even think there's really any kids programs like on the big ocean liners. So, river cruises are about having fancy food and seeing beautiful scenery while floating down some river here in Europe. And when I think back to being a kid, being 12 years old, I think that would be like probably one of the most boring things I could imagine. So I personally don't think it's a really big deal that they're banning kids from their river cruises. And to think about having no kids on an ocean cruise, that doesn't bother me either. I don't have any kids, so of course that is, that has an influence on my opinion about this. But, there are so many other cruises that you can take your kids on, so I don't know why anybody would want to get worked up about this. And here is a question I have for you. What do you think about businesses all together offering kid-free things? So, if you look at it in the one way saying banning kids, but if you look at it in sort of like a positive way, you can say like kid-free hours. Or what do you think about movie theaters offering like kid-free showings? So if you go to this showing of Avengers or whatever, you pay like 50 cents more, and that is the kid-free showing. Would you be willing to pay a little bit extra to go to the movies if you knew that kids were not allowed in this showing? Or what about kid-free flights? Would you be willing to pay a little bit extra if you had a guarantee there will not be a screaming kid anywhere near you on this flight? I think that sounds kind of interesting. And as far as cruise lines go, I haven't done a lot of research, but I know that now that Viking is definitely kid-free across the whole line, starting in August. And I know that that Richard Branson's Virgin Cruise Line, which hasn't started yet, but they have announced from the get-go that it will be an adult-only cruise line. So do you guys know any other cruise lines where like kids are not allowed? I'm not talking about like specific cruises. I'm talking about like cruise lines where they say no children allowed on this line. I wonder if like Sea Star or some of those, like really fancy ones are also kid-free. I don't know. Before I move on, I just want to say a special thanks to Elisabetta Arriero for showing that story to me or suggesting this story to me. Thanks, Elisabetta. All right, moving on. The Carnival Horizon had a little faux pas. They crashed a little bit into the pier in New York. They crashed into Pier 90, I believe it was. And the pier has been damaged, but I think if you look at it, it seems to be a part that isn't really used anyways. At least it didn't look nice in the first place. And the ship has just some minor damage. Hasn't been, none of the itineraries or anything were affected, so that's good news. But it's just weird to think that, you know, Carnival's newest ship, which I would think would have, you know, like the highest standard of navigation help or whatever, you know, I don't know exactly if they have, you know, like you know, like parallel parking assistance or something like that. I just think it's weird to think that like it is Carnival's newest ship that there's already been an incident with it. You know, that's too bad. Too bad for Carnival, too bad for whoever was piloting the ship at the time of this crash. But good to know that nobody was hurt and that nobody's itinerary was affected. And one of the stories I read said that the ships, when they dock there, not just Carnival ships, but any ships, they have to do this really wild, like 90-degree turn or like 45-degree turn, and then like go directly into the slot if there's another ship already docked there. So apparently it's not an easy thing to do anyways, and the pilot or the captain at this time just didn't do it right. So hopefully he'll get it right next time. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the amount of pressure on you when you have when that's like your job? You know, think of how stressful it can be when you're trying to parallel park in like traffic and you know you have to stop everybody behind you and they're just waiting for you to get into the slot. Think of the amount of pressure that's on your head at that time. Now imagine that you're parking you know, like $1 billion or a several $1 million cruise ship with like 4,000 people on it. I'm glad that my job isn't that stressful because you know what? Even if I was making a ton of money, I still don't think I could deal with that. Know what I mean? All right, moving on to a story that's personally I think is interesting that I was a little bit shocked by when I read it this afternoon, and that is there are possibly some changes coming to Space Mountain in Florida, and it's not to the ride itself, it's to the exit. And for people who haven't been there, for people who aren't like big Disney fans like I am, this really might not seem like a big deal, but the whole Space Mountain experience is just, it's like a rite of passage. You know, if you're my age and you went to Disney when you were a kid, then you know Space Mountain has always been, you know, the way it's been. They've added some small changes to it. They've updated some things. You know, they added they've sort of enclosed the boarding area, but altogether, the general experience has stayed basically the same. And one thing that has been there since I can remember as a little kid is this moving walkway that takes you from where you get out of your rocket back out into Tomorrowland. And it's sort of, you start and it goes down a little bit and then it goes up a little bit and you go past these scenes, these, you know, like moonscape scenes or whatever, and there's this weird boo, 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 boo music. And one thing that was really cool back in the 80s was there was a movie camera and you saw yourself on television. And you know, nowadays with everybody having a camera on their telephone, it's really not that hard to see yourself in high definition on television. However, back then that was a really big deal. Anyways, reports say that they are taking all that out. At least, definitely the moving walkway, the report I read today said that the moving walkway was so old that they can't get any replacement parts for it anymore. So that is definitely being worked on at the moment, and speculation, people speculate that it's just going to be removed and it's going to become a normal walkway where you have to like walk and not just stand there and be moved past all this stuff. And like I said, it's just a minor thing, but to me that was always part of like, you know, that was part of the Space Mountain experience. And if it's changed a lot, and if they change the theming and take away the boo, boo, boo sound, I don't know, for me it's just gonna be, I don't know, it's like taking away part of those childhood memories, and you know, every time I've ridden it, it just felt like part of the experience and reminded me of seeing that for the first time when I was a kid. And that's why, I don't know, it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like a tradition. I don't know. I can't think of the word to describe it, but if you understand what I mean, then please let me know in the comments below that I'm not the only person who will miss that if they change it, or if it's, you know, like gone forever. All right, those were the 3 stories that I came up with. Let me know if you like these kind of videos where I kind of talk about cruise and travel news. And now comes the time on Sunday Sofa Time where I comment on your comments live on air. In last week's Sunday Sofa Time, I talked about Kay Longstaff, this woman who fell off the Norwegian Star in the Adriatic Sea and was rescued 10 hours later. You know, it looks more and more like she didn't fall, that she jumped, which is basically what happens to everybody who falls off a cruise ship. And I have had such a good time reading through your comments, like this one from Mrs. BS. BS, it has a lot to do with the story. Mrs. BS writes, "No, she didn't accidentally fall off the ship. I hope they make her pay for all the resources it took to find and rescue her." And that's a very good point. What do you guys think? If it can be proved that she willfully jumped off the ship, don't you think she should have to pay for the rescue costs and for the costs that the cruise line incurred to stop their route and search for her? You know, it's a lot of money, but I think, you know, I kind of think that she should. What do you guys think? Apple Fall Tree writes, "Hubby and I were just discussing this yesterday. We've both worked on cruise ships, and while we encountered many passengers we wished would have accidentally fallen overboard, sadly, none of them ever did." I think that's hilarious. However, a friend of ours was working on board a different ship when a man accidentally went overboard, and the alarm was raised immediately. Her telling of the tale sounds terrifying as the entire ship did its version of an epic emergency stop and U-turn. In the crew area where she was at the time, things were falling from shelves and they became trapped inside a room as one of the large porter trolleys they were unloading rolled behind the door and wedged it shut. That does sound very dramatic. Miraculously, they found the man at sea virtually unharmed. Good for him, but I wonder, did he have to pay? All in all, I don't think there was anybody in the comments who sympathized with this woman, except saying that maybe she had some mental issues, which is true, but everybody wrote that they didn't believe that she accidentally fell off the ship. There's a lot of quotation marks happening in this comment section, and the final comment I want to read I thought was hilarious is from Black Butterfly. She writes, "I accidentally gain 5 pounds every time I go on a cruise." And I think, yeah, me too. I accidentally eat too much food and I accidentally drink too much alcohol every cruise. Thanks everybody for hanging out with me here on this Sunday Sofa Time. I'll be back next week with another interesting travel-related video for you. On Friday, there's going to be another video coming from Miami, so check that out. And like I said, if you haven't done it yet, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Bye-bye.